Hey, it's me, David Diley. Welcome to the Scarlet View. First of all, sorry for the lack of an episode last week. I was extremely busy completing a couple of commercial projects for clients, which, as you can understand, always has to come first. But we are back this week, and it's with a question that I get asked an awful lot, and that is how to grade underwater footage. So today we're going to take a look at that with a quick tutorial and look at how we can make your footage go from looking like this to looking like this. Okay, so we're going to take a look at two clips, one raw and one not raw. We're going to start with the raw clip here. This was filmed by Anita in Australia, this beautiful sand tiger shark. This was shot on Red Dragon 6K in 4K DCI at 25 frames a second. So if we have a quick look through it. We're a little bit stuttery because my edit suite is doing some other work in the background as well. But as you can see, very blue, very green, but we are getting some color of that shark that actually is present, which is good. Now, we're going to start in the raw panel. Just before I start, actually, just to let you know, this screen capture is coming out in 2K from my calibrated monitors. So if you're on an HD or a 4K monitor and it's not calibrated, at your end it will look a little bit different, and we've got to factor in YouTube compression for that as well. But you should get a very solid idea of what's actually going on at my end. So starting in the raw panel, we're going to choose full res premium. We're going to select clip. We're going to use the digitally enhanced blacks, and we're going to do some basic corrections here in the raw panel. The exposure looks good to me. We're going to bring up the scopes as well to begin with. The exposure is pretty good. This is pretty deep. I would imagine probably somewhere around 20 meters, 20 to 25 meters. So we're going to be losing light, and the way that the physics of light works underwater is red and magenta are the first colors to go. So that's why your footage will always look very blue, very green, the deeper that you go. But we will look to address that. The better your camera, the better the lights that you're using, the more of that detail you'll be able to retain in the grades. So looking here, we've got very little red. It's all down in the bottom end. But we've got a fair bit of green and blue, which are represented quite well. There's plenty of latitude and room for us to play with these. So let's go into the raw panel. As I said, exposure is looking pretty good, so I'm going to leave that at 640. Now I'm going to start by warming this up quite a lot. Now, as you can see, that's really bringing the green into it. Don't panic though, because what we're going to do is we're going to offset that in the tint by bringing more of a magenta edge into it. Now, I'm not going to push this too hard. I want that shark's snout and the underside of its body to get closer to white. We're getting a little bit pink there, so I think probably about there. That's pretty good. So I want that shark, the underside of that shark, to resemble the more natural look of these animals underwater. I'm very fortunate in that I've spent quite a bit of time with sand tigers underwater, so I know what they're supposed to look like at this depth, and we're getting a lot closer now. That shark's really starting to pop out a little bit more. Still got a bit more of a pinky hue going on here, but we can address that. So that's our first basic change that we're going to make. Now we're going to come into the primaries wheels. We do need to warm this up a little bit more, and you'll see that it does make quite a bit of difference. So pushing towards the kind of the orange side of the color wheel, that's too much. Just bringing it up a little bit more towards the reds. Now we're getting obviously more warmth in there, but that is impacting here on the underside of the snout. So we're getting more of that light pollution from the light in itself. Plus in the water here, it's got a bit more of that kind of cloudy magenta edge to it, which we don't want, but we can address that. So we're going to up the contrast. Not too much. Probably about there. And now I'm going to do something now which is probably a little bit counterintuitive to what you may think. So one of the first things that people do when they're grading underwater footage, because they see it looking so blue or so green, is that they want the other colours in there, so they come and they bang the saturation way up, which of course if we did that now it would look horrific. So let's reset that. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to desaturate. I'm going to bring that down a little bit, not too much, but we're just going to take the edge off a little bit. Probably, certainly not that far, probably to around about 42, maybe a little bit higher. Let's say 45, which definitely is taking the edge off where that light's reflecting off the shark's snout. And I want to, in the bottom end here, is just bring that over to the yellows a little bit. Now, probably about there. We need to take some of the warmth out of the highlights, so we're going to bring this the gain over to the left a little bit more there. So again, we've got that snout looking back to kind of where we wanted it to be. The water's not looking great, but we will look at that. But when the shark comes closer, there we go. It's really starting to pop out now against the background. So as the balance, as a basic change, if you look over here at the parade and the waveform, compared to where we were before, we're a lot more balanced, which is good. That vector scope as well, if we bring it in, this is what the closest to the white point that we've got. We're getting a lot closer, which is good. So bring this out. The next step that I'm going to do is add another serial node, and then I'm going to add a film stock. Now, this stage that I'm going to do now might look a little bit weird, but bear with me. I'm going to choose Canon. I'm going to choose the 7D, 60D, and the ProLoss profile. Completely different camera, obviously, but it works for me pretty well as a profile to use when I've done my grading. I generally add film stocks and anything that would approach a LUT towards the end of a grade. I don't want a LUT to dictate the look for me. I want to build that look and then do some changes within a film stock to accent the look that I've actually put on. So I'm going to use a codec film stock, and I'm going to first of all take all the grain out. Try again. We've used the Kodak 5213 Vis 3 profile film stock, and I'm going to back that down a little bit more. Why does that keep doing that? I don't know. Never mind. It's doing it again. Let's try. There, we got there in the end. Okay, so we bring it closer. We're looking a lot more cinematic and a lot more filmic. And I think what we probably want to do is bring the curve down a little bit. It's become, obviously we've got that nice contrast that you get from film in there, but I think it was a little bit too heavy before. So if we do that, it's looking quite nice. Now, if we bring the lows a little bit more down on the yellow side, just a touch, it's going to give it a bit more of a natural look for underwater, and we're really starting to get somewhere now. So the next step that we're going to do is add another serial node, and I want to see what we can do with this water up here. So we're going to go into hue versus saturation, make our selection, and then let's see what happens if we bring the saturation up a bit. Let's widen it out. Okay, that's looking pretty good. It's providing a nice backdrop to this, which is slightly more green. Now, if we were to desaturate it, obviously it looks very dramatic, but that's not what it looks like underwater. So we won't go too heavy on that. We'll bring that to about there. And then we're also going to go into luma versus saturation. And we're going to desaturate the bottom end of the image and desaturate the top end of the image. And that is looking pretty good. So here's the ungraded with the raw correction. And then here's the graded image. Now, you can see in here, there is a fair bit of noise that's being brought out. I much prefer to use Neat Video and do that within Premiere Pro. But if you wanted to do that in Resolve, if you wanted to do some noise reduction, this is what I'd suggest you do. Come in here, try and keep it as low as you can get away with. There, that's not too bad. Because we've done some noise reduction, we've lost a bit of definition. I'm going to come in, sharpen it up just a bit. That's probably a bit too much, I'd say, about there. And then the final step would be to come into here, choose Film Convert again. It's got a nicer grain to it than the film grain setting in Resolve. It's got a much more organic look. So we're going to use the same profile as before, but we're going to get rid of all the film color. I'm going to take the grain down to about 35, which just offsets that slightly plasticky look you can get when you're denoising sometimes. And we're going to take a look now in full screen. So here's the ungraded version with raw correction, and here's the graded version. And we'll play a comparison between the two towards the end of the video. So that's clip one. Right, so the second clip that we've got here is from Andrei Voinigescu. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly, Andrei. Sorry if I haven't. And it was shot on the Panasonic GH5, this lovely manta ray in Vlog, 422 10-bit. And I have to say, the more I work with Vlog, the more I like it as a picture profile. It's just so good to work with. So this should be relatively straightforward. So if we watch the clip from start to finish, it's in 4K DCI once again. It's a lovely shot. As we can see, again, very greeny, very blue tint to it, but there is the color detail in here. If you're looking at the coral, I can already tell by looking at this, just as a flat image, that this is going to grade pretty well, so I'm not concerned about it. So lovely shot, Andrei. Thanks for sending it over for me to do some work on for you. So starting off, let's find a nice position to start the grade. With underwater, here's a point to consider as well. With moving subjects like this, if you notice, this manta ray starts in a lot of light here, so the luminosity is going to be higher, and then moves across, and the clip actually gets a little bit darker, which you can see if we turn the scopes on. So if you watch the waveform over here, starting there, you'll see that it lowers down and we start losing some of that luminosity. So generally, the majority of the clip is here in this mid-range, so that's where I'm actually going to pick to grade the image. So there is probably quite a nice starting point. The white balance on here, this is shallower, so we've got more red in. The white balance is pretty good. So to begin with, we're going to add a new serial node, and let's try and warm this up a bit. Obviously, we don't have the raw tab with this, so we're just doing this within the primaries wheels. So using the midtones first of all, we're going to bring that red up a bit. In the highlights, we're going to bring some of that green down by pushing more towards the magenta. It's not a big problem that we have blue here being quite dominant, because this huge expanse of blue. But that's already, to my eye, that's already looking pretty nice. Bring it across slightly more to the blue and magenta side. So if we take a look at that, just that first stage, so that first basic correction, that's the raw file or the ungraded file, and that's graded. So we've already got a lot more color in there. The next thing I'm going to do is bring some contrast into the image. Probably not too much, probably around about the 1.22 mark. We've lost a little bit of the exposure on that, so we're going to bring the mid up a little bit, probably boost that high range a bit to make it pop as well. I'm going to bring the low end down just a touch by going into the log wheels and just bringing that bottom end down a bit more. Again, just provides a little bit more contrast. And I might risk adding a little bit more saturation in as well. Don't want to overdo it though. So I think about, we say 62 is probably about the max that I'm wanting to go. So that would be my first balance. So ungraded, graded, already it's a world of difference. Because the luminosity on the image changes as well, I just want to check it here to make sure that it's not offensively bright, which it's not. We've got the highlights, they've got this nice soft roll off up at the top here, nothing clipping or looking ugly, which is good. And when we bring into the darker image, we're not crushing the blacks too much, which is nice. Good reference point, starting looking at the underside of the wings of the manta as well. Here they're a yellowy green, and here they are the color that we want them to be. Again, there's a lot of noise in this image. We will probably do some denoising at the end of it as well. So that's the first stage, that's the balance. We're going to add another serial node, and once again I'm going to add some film stock, and I'm going to use exactly the same trick as before. Canon 7D with ProLost. That is actually very contrasty, so we're going to pick a film stock which is a bit brighter. That Fujifilm is quite nice. Yeah, I think we're going to go with the Fuji 8553 ET. We have lost a bit of exposure, so we're going to need to address that within the contrast, but we are going to dial this down a bit. And just to reiterate again, I'm not saying you have to choose Canon 7D ProLost as your starting point on your film stock. It's just, it works well for me, and I don't always use it, but I do use it quite regularly. So first thing we're going to do is, why does it keep doing that? Is we're going to take this down to 0, get rid of that grain, and we're going to roll this back to about 65. Let's take a look at the, before we do that, I think the curve, we need to bring that down a little bit as well. And I think we're going to take a look at the scopes as well, see how our exposure's looking there. Yeah, we're going to bring the bottom end up a bit. Contrast is nice, but we don't want it to look too crushed. So within the film sets, if we go back again to the brighter side of the image, and then to the darker side, exposure's looking nice. We are well within our limits. We're not clipping at the highlights. We're not crushing the blacks, so we're looking good. And then the next stage would be another serial node into luma versus saturation. Bring the saturation down in the shadows, and then in the highlights we're going to bring it down as well. Probably not all the way. Let me check up here. There. No, we'll probably leave it about there. And then that's looking good to me. So here's the ungraded image, and here's the graded image. So just for the sake of it, we'll add some denoising, because if you do choose to do your denoising within Resolve, you go into here, about 10. See, this is why I'm not overly keen on using it in Resolve. It does come out a little bit splotchy, but just for a quick rough and ready job, we'll use that. We will sharpen it up just a touch. Again, I don't do my sharpening in Resolve either. I'm only using it in Resolve to make the tutorial kind of pretty straightforward. So because we've softened it out so much, we'll want to add some grain in. So we're going to get rid of the film color. We don't want that affecting it. And say 25. No, say 30. And then come out, and that is looking pretty nice to me. Ungraded and graded. So now we're going to take a look at the comparison between the two clips rendered out. So there you have it. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Hit subscribe, make sure to hit the notification bell, and I will see you again next week. Thanks for watching.